Do you ever find, when playing retro games, that your gameplay skills are not quite as hot as you remember them being back in the day? Or maybe you were never actually that great to begin with, but you just enjoy playing them? Or maybe there was a piece of music or a graphic on a game that you loved and you wanted to save it, to listen to or view on its own, or maybe even modify it? Well, the answer to all your problems comes in the form of a cartridge called Action Replay from Detail. Now, these were made for so many different systems back in the day, but the one we're going to focus on today is for the Amiga 500. And I've got really vivid memories of seeing these advertised in all the Amiga magazines back when I was a kid, and thinking how incredibly cool they looked. Not only because of the really bright, eye-catching aesthetic of the adverts, but also the huge list of features that spilled over 2 pages that it promised it could deliver always intrigued me. And it took me a while, but I finally got my hands on one. Now, the Action Replay, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a freezer cartridge, which allows you to suspend the state of the computer while a program's running and go looking through the system's RAM, meaning you can then modify, extract, and save the information from it. And I've got the Action Replay 3 for the Amiga 500. Now, as you can see, it's got a really simple, clean design. All we've got here on the top is a power LED, we've got the big red freeze button, which is probably the most useful feature here, and a slow motion control. And connecting it to the Amiga 500 is really simple. It simply slots into the DMA side expansion port on the A500, the same place that hard disks, accelerators, and CD-ROM drives connect, so if you had any of those, unfortunately, you couldn't use them at the same time. And as the name would suggest, this is the 3rd version they released for the Amiga 500, and the features got more sophisticated over time. Now, originally these were aimed at helping games players to cheat, and the Action Replay still helps a lot with that, but also it's packed with a lot more features too. So how does it work exactly? Well, let's load up one of my favourite games and see. Yeah, not that one. Now, most games on the Amiga were what's called non-system friendly, meaning they would bypass the computer's operating system and instead address the hardware directly. And most had features like copy protection and other measures built in, designed to stop you snooping around and stealing things from the disk. But with the Action Replay plugged in, it's simply a case of loading up your favourite game from disk, and then, with the Action Replay attached, we can start to have some fun. First, we'll check out the slow motion feature, and this can be handy if you've got a game with a really tricky section that you just need that little bit more time and a bit more precision to get past. So all you do is turn on the slow motion switch, and then, by rotating the dial, the entire system will slow down to a crawl. So this deaccelerates the Amiga, meaning you can take all the time you need to get through that tricky section and then put the dial back up or switch it off and you're back up to full speed. But the real fun comes in when you hit that red freeze button. Then the game or program you're running will be suspended and you'll be dropped into the Action Replay's built-in command line. And the first thing you'll see is that it's actually got a built-in virus checker, which will automatically check your Amiga's RAM for any resident viruses, which is very useful. Luckily, I've still got the manual which walks you through all of the features and commands that are supported, but if you've got one of these cartridges and you haven't got the manual handy, you can just press the Help key on the keyboard and it will list all of the commands and features that you can access from here, and as you can see, there are loads of them. It's actually got a 256K ROM on board. Now, of course, I'm not going to walk you through every single feature, or this video will be about 4 hours long, but we'll have a look at some of the most useful and fun things that you can do with the Action Replay 3. And this command line actually supports a lot of the same commands that you'll find in Amiga DOS, meaning that if you want to do things like directory listings and formatting a blank disk to save things on, you don't need to boot into Workbench to do them. You can do those operations directly from within the Action Replay's MemPika command line. And this can be handy in general use, as it means you've always got a lot of the most used commands accessible that you might have used on your Amiga every day, only without the need to track down your Workbench disk. You've essentially got all those commands in ROM anytime you've got the Action Replay cartridge attached, which was actually really handy. Now, I've always loved the music on Lotus Turbo Challenge 2. Barry Leach's incredible intro mod, heavily inspired by Yellow, and it's one of my all-time favourite Amiga mods. I actually sold an Amiga back in the day on this music. A friend of mine at school, he got an Amiga shortly after hearing this on my A500. At the time, He just had an Amstrad 286 PC with the built-in PC speaker. Then he came around my house, heard this, his jaw dropped, and he just had to have one. So what if I want to listen to it outside of the game, or even rip all the samples and have a bit of a play around with them? Well, all we need to do is have the song playing, then obviously we know it's loaded into the system's RAM, and then freeze the game and type in tracker. And then the Action Replay will scan the computer's RAM for music module files. And shortly after, it looks like it's found it. Now, to double check, we can play it from here. And then we simply save it out to a blank disk. And then if we quickly swap over the monitor input to my other Amiga, doesn't everybody have two Amigas set up ready to go at any time? Then we can load it into Pro Tracker, and from here, we've got access to the entire mod and all the samples that it uses, ready for us to make our own kick-ass track around them. But also it means you can snoop around as well, and from time to time, you might even discover some hidden secrets. For example, if we keep going through all the samples in the Lotus 2 intro music, we find this lone isolated sample, way into the sample bank called SAMP. So what happens if we play this? Well, we get this hidden message.
You will not copy this game. You will not copy this game. You will not copy this game.
Yeah, and that actually says, you will not copy this game. This was actually a subliminal message that's hidden fatally in the background of the intro music. Probably not something you get away with today, but since everybody I knew back then had a pirated copy of Lotus 2, it probably wasn't all that effective then either. And after we've done that, we just press X and hit return to resume the game. And it doesn't just work for audio. Say we wanted to save this really nice picture of a Lotus car, all we do is freeze it when it's on screen, and then press P to show the image in RAM, and then we can save it by typing in SP, which saves it out as an IFF file onto our blank disk. And then swapping back to the other Amiga, we can load up that IFF image in DPaint. And this was the reason that every games reviewer had an Action Replay cart back in the day, because before these came along, they had to try and take photographs of the screen. But obviously with Action Replay, it meant getting screenshots for reviews was a breeze. Just press it and save the image out. Now, of course, another main feature of the Action Replay was making your own game trainers and getting past those tricky parts in games. Now, a lot of these classic games back then expected you to finish the entire game using only a couple of lives, often without even any continues. And if your gameplay skills are not quite what they were, I mean, be honest, how many Amiga games did you actually finish back then? Then the Action Replay cart can help you out here. Now, I'm going to use a game that's actually pretty easy, but it will do as an example, and it is one of my all-time favourite Amiga platformers, the brilliant James Pond 2 Robocod. So we get into the game, and yeah, I do know there is a cheat here that you can do to get infinite lives with the items. I know about that one. But looking at the bottom, you can see that we've got 3 lives and 3 lots of energy on each life. So if we go forward a bit to an area of the game where I can quickly die. And here we'll do, and just before we do it, we'll freeze the game and ask the Action Replay to keep an eye on the system memory for something with the value of 3, because we've got those 3 lives. And now we'll press X and return to get back into the game and quickly die. Now you can see I've got 2 lives, so we'll freeze again. And now I'm going to ask the Action Replay to look for something that's changed to the value of 2 since the last freeze. And as you can see, it's found a location in RAM where it thinks the life counter is likely to live. And the Action Replay's actually got a built-in memory monitor, so we can view that location with the M command, and we see that 2 there. I can change that to a 3. And if we go back into the game again, we can see that now we've got 3 lives, and that worked. Now that's a really simple example. There are lots of deeper trainer features in here as well, so you could go much more in depth and set infinite lives and disable routines, but that's a quick demo of what it can do. And another annoyance back then was the lack of continues or save states. A lot of us today use save states in emulators, but Action Replay was doing this back in 1991. Now to demo that, I'm going to show you the brilliant Amiga version of Golden Axe. Now I'm of course playing with Gilius Thunderhead. Why would anyone pick any other character? And if we get into the first level a little bit, we're having fun here, but maybe we need to go out or it's past our bedtime. We want to save the game and pick it up again tomorrow. Now back in the day, you'd have to freeze it and probably leave your Amiga on overnight, but now we can just freeze the game here and type in SA, which will save the state, give it a title, we'll call it GX. And then, after a couple of minutes of slow colour cycling, where it's gathering all the RAM locations into a file, it will then write it out to our blank disk. Now, like I said, it takes a couple of minutes to do it, but then, as you can see, we can reboot the Amiga and load the game back up from fresh. And when that's done, if we freeze it, put our blank disk in again, and then using the LA command, so LA and the file name was GX, and when that's loaded in, we put the game disk back in and continue, and we're back where we left off. So that could be really useful. Now, as I said at the start of the video, they did make Action Replay cartridges for so many different systems, and I was going to demo the Sega Mega Drive version in this video. I picked this up from a gaming market last year, but unfortunately, I didn't get around to trying it out until now, and it turns out, yeah, it doesn't actually work. Maybe because the enable switch on the side is actually totally jammed on my unit, but if I can maybe disassemble this and get it running at a future point, I will make a video at some point on this in the future. But getting back to the Amiga, although it wasn't all that popular, they did make a trapdoor-based version for the Amiga 1200, which I think must be pretty rare, because from the few forum posts I could find out about it, apparently not many people owned it, but the few that did reckon it's not as good as the earlier versions. But if you've got a later Amiga, or you use emulation, there are software solutions that let you do many of the same things as an Action Replay cartridge, and we'll have a look at those in just a second. Before we do, if like much of the world, you're stuck at home with lots of time on your hands at the moment, why not turn that time into something productive? This video is sponsored by my good friends at Skillshare, and their amazing online classes are a fantastic way of learning new skills. And if you're not familiar with Skillshare, they're a huge online learning community where millions of people come together to take the next step in their own creative journey. And they've got thousands of classes designed for creative and curious people on all kinds of topics, from illustration, design, photography, video freelancing, and lots more, all in easy to digest parts. And you might know that I do a weekly retro gaming podcast. Now, usually we record that in a studio, but recently, with everything going on, we've had to do remote recordings. And I found the classes on how to set up a home podcasting studio to sound like a pro by Almost 30 Podcast to be really useful in helping us getting it sounding the best we can. And that's just one of the amazing classes that you can check out on Skillshare, which is also incredibly affordable. Especially at the moment if you're working from home, it's a great way to learn with your extra time, and obviously a lot cheaper and safer than pricey in-person workshops, with an annual subscription being less than $10 a month. Now, I want you to join me on my journey and become part of the Skillshare community, and I've got this amazing offer that you'll have to be quick to claim, as it's strictly limited to the first 500 of my subscribers to click the link at the top of this video's description. And if you do that right now, you will get 2 completely free months of premium membership, so you too can explore your creativity and passion. And of course, you'll really be helping out the channel by doing that, so claim it quick thanks to Skillshare. So what if you want to do this today on your WHD load souped up Amiga? Well, obviously, if you run emulation, things like save states are actually built in to the brilliant WinUAE emulator, and it's even got Action Replay emulation features built in, so you can access all of those great features that we talked about a bit earlier on in this video. But if you've got actual old-school Amiga hardware, there was a software rip of the Action Replay 3 cartridge, which was an unofficial build called Action Replay 4, which is supposed to run from floppy, but try as I might, I couldn't get past the rather weird intro screen before it crashed on my system. But from what I've read on forums, it doesn't run all that well, and apparently the trainer functions are not working in it either, so I'd give that one a miss. But there are some really good alternative options. Now, one of them is a piece of software that's been around for a long time, which is essentially a software clone of Action Replay called HRT-Mon. This was first uploaded to Aminet back in 1998, and for some reason that is still the latest version that you'll find on there. But if you go to the WHD load page, there is a few newer versions, including one from 2017 that was actually designed to work with WHD load, which of course is a tool that lets you install all your classic floppy-only Amiga games onto a hard disk or an SD card. And you can run HRT-Mon entirely with software. You can configure it to launch when you press the right mouse button, and it will drop you into a command line that supports many of the same features and the same commands as Action Replay. And it does manage to stay resident with a lot of games running, but I have found some where it doesn't seem to launch properly. Now, for the best experience and to get around that, they recommend that you build a simple device, which is called a Level 7 interrupt button. Now, this is really a simple switch on a cable with a couple of resistors that means you can press it and then it will act like the freeze button on the Action Replay cartridge. And another software freezer that is highly regarded is Thrill Kill. Now, I believe this was actually a commercial product back in the day, but now you can download it for free as abandonware, and of course I'll put links in the video description. And it does look really similar to Action Replay 3 and supports many of the same and maybe even more commands actually. So if you want to get download links to those and the schematics to build your own Level 7 button, I will put those in the video description. So that's been a look at the Action Replay 3 cartridge. Maybe you used one of these on the Amiga or another system back in the day. I'd love to hear your memories of Action Replay in the video comments. And you may know that I do a weekly retro gaming podcast that we are still doing, even in these difficult times, every Friday called the Retro Hour. Now, last week I did an episode with the father of Pong, and this week we get some incredible stories from Bullfrog and Psygnosis in the PlayStation years. And you can get it from any podcast client, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or download it directly from theretrohour.com. And if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to check out another one on my channel and maybe even consider supporting me on Patreon if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.